today's critique, nope, don't have anything planned. Do any of you have an artwork that you have photos of on your device that
Yes.
you want to share, and we can do it? I see Susie, I heard Karen.
Yeah.
All right.
I tried to email it, but it came back.
Yeah, sorry. Well, if you have a photo of it on your device, I can have you share your screen and we can look at it that way. So Susie, are you ready with yours?
Yes.
Are you able to share screen, or do I need to make you a co-host?
Looking at this, I think I can share screen. Oh,
Okay.
host disabled, attendee screen.
Okay, then I will make you a co-host, and that way you can, now you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. And let's see if this.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay.
Awesome.
I'll tell you, this piece is a problematic piece for me. It's somewhere in between the abstract work that I've been doing and more figurative work. And I intentionally didn't want to have a focal point, but I wanted to have this kind of diagonal movement. But now that it's all done, I just don't like it. So I'm trying to figure if I should cut it up, put some bigger fish on it, or if I just roll it up and let it be what it is.
Okay, so what we're going to do is go through our regular critique process, where we just go through the I totally lost my train of thought in the middle of a sentence. That never happens to anybody else, does it? We'll go through the regular critique process where we just analyze it. And sometimes hearing other people analyze it will help you see it more clearly. And nobody's going to say, you should do this or you should do that. That's your job alone. But if they say, like, my eye goes from here to here and there, you might go, oh, maybe I might have a different, maybe I can figure out how to make something different happen. I know I find it very clarifying when I hear other people describe the elements and principles in my work. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, so the first thing we do is describe the facts. It's a finished piece, you said. We can say it's abstract with a tiny bit of representation in there because we interpret those shapes as little fishies. Which often in our minds brings up other things so that then we associate the other shapes and lines and colors with the fishy part. Susie, do you see up in the right hand corner your little
yeah.
If you can click out that, then we can see the whole thing. So can you tell us the size of this piece?
Yes, it's about 68 by, it's big, 68 by 48, 40,
okay.
by 42.
And it's cloth?
It's all fabric, it's fused, it's machine stitched, hand stitched. The background was designed with on my iPad, and then it's screen printed with a kind of crappy screen, the little tiny fish shapes, the linear ones, and then the rest are fused and stitched, machine stitched.
Okay, all right. It's finished, but you're questioning it. So that's one of the facts about the work. So let's go through the elements. Remember, the elements are line, which leads the eye on a journey, shape, which has activity and meaning, color, which is all about relationships, value, which creates the illusion of depth and dimension. I'm missing something. Texture, which is either the way it feels or the patterning that we see on the surface. So does anybody want to volunteer to choose one of the elements, and you'll describe the element as it is in this artwork? So for instance, if it was color, you could say it's an overall mostly blue, I see lines of yellow. I mean, you just basically describe the element, where and what it is, and then you can say how the element is functioning in the piece. Anybody want to volunteer? Nobody's volunteering. All right, I'm going to call Karen.
Okay.
Choose an element.
I'm going to go with color.
Okay.
I think the colors are they seem to be well balanced, with mostly the yellow and the blues, the different shades of blues, so that the eye keeps moving. You've put white in some places, which also keeps the eye moving, but the white balances some of those more concentrated areas of blue.
What other colors do you see here? Blue is dominant. What other colors?
Yes, orange. Orange. Some black or very dark blue. And the color seems to be, and white. There's a good bit of white.
Do you see yellow on your screen?
I do see yellow.
Okay, lots of yellow.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
So if we have orange, yellow, and blue, can you sort of kind of fit it into a color scheme when they're opposites?
Well, they're not. Yeah, the orange and blue are color opposites.
Right, and then yellow is right next to the orange.
Yeah,
so
it's right next to it.
Right, so it's complementary going into like a little wide on the orange side. And so what happens when you have a complementary color scheme? When colors are opposites?
That's where I get stuck. I think it provides some balance. Yes.
Energy.
Definitely energy.
Right. So complementary color schemes make each color look more of what they are. They're so different that they accentuate each other. I think when it's called complementary, it means like when you give somebody a compliment, you're saying, you look great today, right? You say something great about them. So when you have opposites, they make each other look more. They make each other.
Doesn't it also make the composition more striking?
It's usually a very visually vibrant thing. If we talk about value in here as well, Meg, can you describe value here, the dark and the light?
Well, I see the white to me would be the lightest part. And when I look at it, the white is spread throughout the piece in a kind of a balanced way. The yellow, I do see, I remember Susie said something about something at a diagonal, and I do see two diagonals. I see a yellow diagonal and a black or dark diagonal that is, okay. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. That's pretty cool.
Neat.
But that, you know, what's good about that is it helps you see the lights and darks,
Absolutely.
the values. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, the dark, with this one, you see the dark diagonal even more, going from bottom left to upper right.
Right, and notice how there is the highest value white that you see is in the small lines, and the little fishies kind of evenly scattered, but in the large white shapes, I see like a grouping of these large white shapes that kind of form from the upper left to the center. They're centered in the bottom and go up a little bit in the middle on the right. But there are some places where there's not as much white in the background. So it kind of creates a grouping and a flow for the eye. So we've definitely got high value from the upper right towards the center. that kind of creates a shape or a line that moves the eye that way. And then we've got the dark value spots that are definitely, they're scattered a little bit, but there's definitely a diagonal grouping that forms a line from the upper right to the lower left, or vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you want to put the color back for us, Susie?
Yeah.
Is this on your iPad on an app?
No, this is on my Mac, and it's in preview view. You can go in and adjust the color, and you can put the saturation all the way down, and that takes.
Awesome. I
That
learned
takes-
something new today.
That's a fast way to see
Value.
your values.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if none of you have done this before, another really super easy way to see value is find on your smartphone's camera, on an iPhone, when you've got your camera open, there's 3 little overlapping circles on the top. If you click those and then slide the little windows that come up to the right, your camera will go into black and white, so that you can just look through your phone's camera at whatever piece you're working on and evaluate the value that way. Good job. Pam, do you want to talk to us about shape? Pam Harris?
Yeah, I'm here. This is my first experience of doing anything like this.
Great, we're glad you're here. So just
So
describe the shapes that you see and describe where they are. You can say, for instance, there are a lot of thin rectangles. They're scattered in different directions in both dark blue and yellow, although the dark blue ones are grouped in a diagonal line. So just describe some of the shapes that you see.
well, and then the I guess they're ovals, which are mostly the orange.
Mhm.
And the dark blue. I don't see as many of the medium blue. Now to me, the amount of white is distracting.
Okay.
The bigger patches of
So
white.
can you describe, instead of saying it's distracting, can you describe what you see and what it's doing and why?
I think it's taking away from the flow, because I think as if you follow the flow from the lower left to the upper right, it seems like you get caught up in the white.
Okay, so you could say that, for instance, I see white shapes that are very high value in the upper left and the center, and they attract my eye. And because they are high contrast in value between that white and the orange shapes or the surrounding background, they become an area of emphasis that competes with the dark lines. Susie, can you see how the dark line going in a diagonal movement doesn't have as much value contrast there, except for in the center medium upper right?
Yes.
But then you have high value usually attracts the attention, right?
Yeah.
And it comes forward in your vision. So if you want that diagonal movement and that diagonal line to show up, you've got less value contrast, especially in the lower left, than you do in places like the upper left. So that is probably what, I forgot who I was talking to. Was it Pam?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry. Just know that if I forget your name, it means I love you. I do this to my children about 20 times a day. so just, I think of you the same way. So there's areas of high value and high value contrast in the upper left and in the center lower that have more value contrast than the diagonal through the center.
Yeah.
And they attract the attention.
So they kind of stop your eye a bit.
Okay,
Mhm.
good, good. And do you see how framing it in the elements, in talking about value and talking about direction of line and talking about how value contrast attracts your attention, turns it into more of an objective analysis, and you figure out why that is happening, then I don't like this, or I think this is good or bad. We want to be objective, and then the artist is the one who decides what to do from there. Casey, would you like to talk about pattern and texture?
Sure. So the texture has always confused me because I equate texture with literal texture on the actual quilt, like frayed edges or
So
something.
let's
But
call texture the way it feels to the touch, and then we'll also talk, and that's actual texture, and then pattern is what I call
pattern,
visual texture.
right,
Where
right.
it's a pattern of dark and light and shapes that come together to create. I mean, when you're, like, if you're painting a picture of a tree, the
Mhm.
patterning that you do on the bark creates the
Creates
idea
texture.
of an actual
Visual, yeah, visual texture.
Right.
So I think I like the white fish that look almost like they've been sort of scratched on or inked on, because I think they give an interesting texture to the background of the other shapes that are also images of fish.
So
I
you've
think
got
all of that line fabric paint manipulation, however she did it, creates a very interesting texture. The yeah, the closer, what, I don't know how she did it, but it looks like if it were like, say, printing. Oh, and now that we get
It
in
was
closer,
screen
I see that
printed.
there's stitching
yeah,
also.
screen printing and stitching.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So I think that creates a lot of texture.
right. So there's the
And,
actual texture of the hand stitched, the seed stitching, and I hadn't seen the stitching over the bars. the
Right,
regular
right.
shape.
Each of the
And then
bars is
there's the
stitched.
repeated pattern of
Mhm.
the almond and the leaf shaped fish. So you've got the repeat of the fabric leaves.
Mhm.
You've got the repeat of the white fish and the blue fish. So it's repeating
It is.
pattern
Yeah.
layered over and over in different colors and shapes.
What was the other one you asked? It was texture and
Pattern.
pattern.
Yeah.
Well, the pattern definitely, yeah, is that. I also wanted to ask something about movement. In previous critiques, it's always been, sort of almost a circular or a diagonal or a whatever. And I find this interesting because, as for my eye, it's going left to upper right, but it also is going upper left to lower right. So you
Wow.
almost have this crossing of
So what
of
elements
movement.
make that happen for you?
I'm sorry, the what?
What
The-
elements take your eye on that
The
journey? How does
color, probably. Color, because it seems like the dominant color going bottom left to upper right is the dark blue, and the yellow seems to be dominant from upper left to lower right.
Right.
Even though there are splashes of it in other places, my eye is following that pattern, and that's what I can think of that would be making it do that.
Right. So another thing that makes it do that is you have this grouping of dark shapes that are repeating, that are gathered into that lower left to upper right diagonal line, right? And then the yellow upper left to lower right line is, I think the yellow pieces don't appear to be gathered as much into a line, but they have the extra of the white behind them that attracts the eye and kind of brings your eye. So that is the kind of movement that your eye goes on. And that's why. It's because of the grouping of those shapes into a line. It's because of value contrast.
The value, yeah.
Right. All right, so those are kind of all the elements. We talked about line along with shape and with value contrast. And I also want to point out that the seed stitching are also tiny little straight lines that echo the other bars, the cutout fabric shapes. So again, it's repetition.
Mhm.
I'm just watching what you do here, Susie, and I'm learning some cool
Use
stuff.
preview. It's so easy to
I've never played around with
work up
preview
stuff.
this way.
You can.
And also,
do a lot.
is it two pieces sewn together?
It's actually more than two pieces sewn together.
Okay.
But it is, that's this, and you know, I wasn't really happy with that, but yeah, if you look closely, there's, well, I can
I
even,
see a line of stitching about 2/3 up.
this line, wait a
Yeah.
minute, it's gonna be,
Susie,
there,
do you
there's
create
this.
pieces on your iPad? Do you then print them at home or send them somewhere?
No, I send them off to be printed, but even then there's, you know, limitations, but most of these I pieced it because one of my issues right now is I have arthritis,
Mhm.
and wrestling a large piece like this through my standard Bernina has really gotten hard to do.
Yeah, it
So
gets
I'm
painful.
trying to find ways to work in
Smaller chunks.
pieces that then I can put together. And this one was one of the first ones, and I don't think it's as successful as some of the ways I've made it work later. And also I bought myself a wider harp brother that I'm trying to learn to use, but it goes so fast it scares the hell out of me.
Practice.
But that a lot of those kind of pieced elements in this one were because I just couldn't I couldn't work with a
They were
a
out
big
of
piece of
physical
fabric at that time.
capacity.
Now, the limitations on sending something to spoon flour is generally with the cottons, it's going to be 40 inches wide.
Right.
Excuse me.
Uh-huh.
So to try to get something wider, I have to piece it
Okay.
also.
I think they're, I've printed on their, it's a cotton, it's got like the satin finish. I can't remember what it's
Sateen.
called. Sateen.
That's the most common.
Satin.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a little bit wider that I've used. Okay, so we talked about all the elements, and then sneaking in there a little bit were some of the principles, like, is there a focal point in here? Not really. And a piece doesn't need a focal point to be successful.
Well, and that was intentional, because I'm really working lately with these ideas of kind of abstract expressionism, where you basically have a piece that's immersive and it doesn't necessarily pull you to one place or another.
Right. I find that a lot of times with abstract work that does not have a focal point, as long as there's an interesting journey for the eye to follow, it keeps you involved and intrigued for a longer amount of time. So unity is another thing that is an important principle. And unity is created when everything in the work of the art, looks like it belongs there. Nothing looks out of place unless the artist wants it to look out of place and wants you to feel uncomfortable with it. And you all can speak up, but I don't see anything here that looks like it's out of place. Usually how you create unity, there are a whole bunch of different ways, but repetition. So she's got a limited color palette here, but there's enough variety in the color palette that it's interesting. Repetition of the shapes, repetition of the textures and the patterns. Again, nothing here looks entirely out of place. I do see that you've got peachy triangular shapes and bars in the background that seem to live mostly on the top. I don't really see as many in the bottom, but they're a wider value of the so they still fit in, and you see a little bit of that peachy bit in some of the leaf orange shapes. So repetition of that. You've also got, here's an interesting one, repetition of the random direction of the lines, right? So
Right.
you've kept, when you have shapes that are all put on randomly, you need enough of them on randomly that looks like it's on purpose. And that's totally what's happening here. Repetition of that almond shape and all the different layers of texture keep it unified. So I don't see anything here really that feels like it's out of place. Balance, symmetry, asymmetry, crystallographic balance, radial balance. Who hasn't had a chance to describe something yet and wants to talk about balance here? Christine, have you talked to us yet? You don't want to? Or do you want to?
I've unmuted myself. That's why I was muted. I will come back in a second.
Okay. All right.
No bark. No bark.
I don't know your name. You're listed as LHH iPad
Oh.
4.
Linda Hall. I'm sorry, that Linda Hall up in Gahanna, Ohio.
Okay, Linda, do you want to talk to us about balance, and I'll rename you?
And I will share my first impression. I could not see the fish shape on my small mini iPad, but I felt like I was standing in a garden of Texas bluebells or columbine, and the wind was blowing seed pods.
Okay.
There was that kind of scattering. It was there, and it was just, you know, the blue, the floral kinds of things, almost like a seed pod or the dead dandelion wisps that you
And
see.
that's from shape and color and pattern. Usually at the end of the analysis, we'll go into what does it remind you of? What does it make you think of? Because everybody has their own set of glasses on, kind of, that are made up of all their experiences and their own associations with those shapes, which I always find really fascinating. So
my eye moved so easily through the piece because the diagonal from bottom left to upper right, the lighter values, the white and lighter colors from upper left to lower right, there was never a halt or a stopping point. My eye moved smoothly through the entire piece. So I found that balance and the balance of color interesting. A little bigger yellow gives the eye a resting place, but you're picked up right to move with the rest of the yellow. There was great flow.
Okay.
To my viewing this at this size.
Okay, so movement is one of the principles, and in this case, it's created by those lines that the collection of darker shapes and the collection of lighter values that keep your eye moving through the piece. Do you want to tell us about balance as in symmetry, asymmetry? Balance, when we talk about the principle, is the visual weight of different elements in the piece.
And the lighter color, the white, is to sort of center, bottom center, but it doesn't stop you there. It's balanced with almost a trinity or a triangle of other shapes, so that it really is asymmetrical in its effective flow through the piece.
Right. So what I see, you're right, is there's no real symmetry. I do feel a heavier weight at the lower left, just because it's darker values down there.
The density.
Right, feel a little bit heavier. But then there's very much a flow throughout the rest of the piece. Good job. Does anybody else have anything else they want to analyze about this piece? All right. Does anybody else have something? Christine, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, sorry, I can. My apologies for the call. That's why I was muted, because I knew it was going to happen. I have a question.
Yes.
It's around scale, because I don't know enough about it. So, and I know you do. So therefore, I'm asking about scale of the piece. Are all the little elements?
Okay, so when I talk about scale as a principle, it's usually the overall size of the work compared to the viewer. So this is a relatively large scale piece. And then when I talk about proportion, it's about the scale and the size of the elements within the piece in relationship with each other. So it's a large scale piece, but most of the elements seem pretty small, seem scattered around. The patches of white tend to come together in larger scale shapes, but they're still background and they're broken up by the smaller shapes and lines that are scattered about on top of them. Does that clarify anything in your mind, Christine?
Yes. I mean, the white patches are large, but as you say, their background, they're almost negative space, aren't they?
Right.
Then the other elements are very similar in size.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it matters or not, or whether there should be a little more change in the scale of size of
Okay.
pieces.
So you're saying there's a consistent scale of the shapes?
Yeah, there's very little variation.
Right. Right. So, so there it is. That's what you see is a consistent scale. That's a small scale repetition of the elements. So Susie's messing around with making larger scale fishies.
Fishes are, the whales have just arrived.
Right. So Susie, as I want to wrap this one up a little bit. But first I will ask all of our participants here, does anybody have comments about this? Thinking, does this remind you of something? Is there anything that stands out to you? Does it make you feel any certain way?
I feel energized.
Okay.
The movement of all the pieces, you know, going on those two diagonals and just the contrast of, say, the yellow and dark blue pieces and the gold against those, I'm going to call them plain areas of the lighter blue, just gives me an energy.
Okay. There is a ton of visual movement here, both created by the complementary color scheme, created by the direction of the shapes and the lines, created by the really complex texture and the planar areas and the more complex areas. Susie, do you have questions?
No, I think I'll have to think about adding maybe some larger shapes, and also maybe, I don't know how I could change some of the white areas, but I might try tinting them just to try to see if I like it better that way. I can always fuse some more big shapes on it and see.
Right. So one thing that's interesting is Christine brought up negative space.
Mm-hmm.
And there really isn't much of it here.
No, there isn't. It's
and there's so
up.
Right. There's so much complexity here that there's no real place for the eye to rest.
Yeah.
And sometimes having a focal point is a place for the eye to rest. Sometimes you don't need a focal point for the eye to rest, but having an area that's less complex gives more interest to the areas that are complex.
Whoops. Sometimes you don't know what you'll get.
Yeah. Okay, for all of you who don't know, Susie is, she teaches some great online classes for how to design with your iPad. So check out her website, and those are there. what's your website called, Susie?
SusieMonday.com.
Well, how,
SUSIEMONDAY.
right. So she can teach you to do some really fun stuff with your iPad.
Mm.
All right. Anything else?
Well, thank you. That was very helpful and interesting. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating to look at a work through that I've been glued to through somebody else's eyes. SusieMonday.com.
Thank you.
I encourage you to look at her classes. They're great.
Yes.
Okie dokie. And Karen, you said you had something on your device?
I do. No,
All right, so tell us about this piece. Tell us the facts of it, how big it is, how it's constructed, just really quickly.
Okay, it's called Breaking Out of the Box, and it's about 42 by 41 inches. It started off with just that black and white box in the center that lived on a design wall for about a year. And then I started putting the smaller squares together that went for like 4 rounds around that.
Uh-huh.
The fabrics were a combination. The solids are all hand dyes. The black and whites, of course, are commercial. I need to back up. This is a piece in a series that I'm calling And Gandhi Said. You know, Gandhi's quote about we must be the change we wish to see in the world. So this is one in that series. After I got the bigger box around, you know, with all the nice, neat little squares, I needed to do something to make it seem as if we are breaking out of the box. So I just cut into it in various places, pulled out a wedge-shaped piece, and then went helter-skelter.
Okay, so it's about 40 inches. It's abstract. It's made of cloth. It looks like in the center there's hanging threads
Yes,
all over it.
lots of hanging threads.
Okay, and it looks like it's machine quilted.
Yes.
Is it all jaggedy around the edge?
It's jaggedy.
Okay,
The black is the background.
and is it finished or unfinished?
I think it's finished.
Okay. All right, so let's go through elements. Does anybody want to choose an element to start with? Any volunteers?
I'll
Speak up.
Oh, the obvious, this one's so easy. The obvious focal point is the black and white square in the middle. I mean, not only is it a bold, separate element, but you even got arrows pointing to it, sort of like, look here.
Okay, so the principle of
is
focal point
nice.
is very dominant here. Okay,
Is
good.
what?
The principle of focal point. Focal
It-
point as a principle is dominant here. So what elements, the elements are texture, shape, color, line, and value, create that as a focal point?
There's marked contrast between black and white and lots of colors. There's contrast in size. That's sort of
The
like one big
size of
element.
the shapes. So
Mhm.
shape is an element. When you're talking about contrast of black and white, you're talking about value contrast.
Okay.
So the contrast of value is the highest in the center with black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Shape of the squares, that's a large square that is larger and more complete than the other squares that are scattered around.
Okay. Value. Huh. Okay. Yeah, so that is the focal point, and it also gives your eye a place to rest
And a very
as
busy
it's
piece.
exploring the other little pieces.
Okay,
Um,
good.
there seems to be a lot of texture in the outside. Texture both, you know, just in the shapes and the edges and all of that. Whereas there doesn't seem as much in the center part, except for the threads, which I didn't realize. Now I see them.
Okay, so describe what texture you're talking about in the outsides. How was that texture created, do you think? And are you talking about actual texture or visual texture? So when we're talking to the elements, we describe the element we see and what it's doing.
Okay, the visual texture of the outside is that it's small pieces that are not always jagged, but I just see texture in the contrast of the pieces that go together on the outside. This is I really need to learn how to describe this.
So if I understand what you're saying, on the outside edges, we have a very the pieces between the white, all these triangular and irregular shapes are evenly scattered. So it's a pattern of those shapes scattered around the white, and then the edges, it's a very irregular pattern that moves into a pattern in the middle, not the very center, but the next layer has less value contrast, but more patterning within each square, and it's a more regular patterning because you've got squares inside of squares, where on the outside border it's all very irregular, and then on the inside it's a very regular orthogonal grid of a pattern. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's just describing what you see. You know, so it's people make it too complicated. Just make it simple. Describe the shapes that you see. Another way you can describe the actual texture of this piece is you see those lines of quilting in the white on the outer border, and you see the outside border of this piece in its scalloped, very, very irregular line all around the outside. And the contrast between the stitching curvy threads in the white, it makes it look puffy. Like it looks like you can feel the depth of the quilting there, as opposed to the flatness of the center block. But then you've also got that feathery lightweight thread hanging off the front that is a more dimensional, softer texture of thread, an actual texture. Okay, who wants to talk about color here?
I will.
Okay.
Well, the colors are, it's a really multicolored piece that really goes through the whole spectrum of hues.
Which is
but
polychromatic.
Yes, polychromatic. But they're all very kind of equal in saturation, so there's not a lot of pastels or grayed out values in any of those colorful pieces. You kind of get a little bit of mid value or mid hue with the grays of the patterns of the black and white fabric that are in the little squares. But I think, you know, if I look through there, I don't see any, you know, pale pinks or kind of the blue. There's some paler blue, but even that paler blue is pretty strongly saturated in terms of how much color is in each part of the shape. And the colors are random but well scattered. You don't see a lot of color that is similar in any one place. Maybe there's a little more red along the bottom. Then along the left side, there's a little bit more blue there. And then, but the top and the right are both very polychromatic in terms of you know, the
Right.
green and blue and yellow and
so
red.
this can also get into balance. So
Mhm.
in this piece, there's kind of a radial symmetry that is happening
Right.
with the balance. You've got that center square, and then from the center, it equally grows towards the outside. Even though it's not a circle, it's doing it in a square. So you've got kind of a mashup of a radial balance where things come from the center and grow toward the outside, and crystallographic balance where things are very evenly scattered around the piece. So there's no one place here except for the center that has more visual weight in its balance than other places. Very good. Does anybody, we've talked about texture and shape and color and value. So we've got line, I believe, that's left. Texture, shape, color, value. Line would be left. Does anybody want to talk about line and just describe the lines that they see here? Linda, do you want to give it a try?
I was struck by this piece and its title when she said breaking out. The center is that very definite high contrast black and white. The next thing I see is a larger frame in gray. We're moving out. It's like we're exploring. We're attempting to break out. We're not quite bold and confident. And then we get out to the really white against those colors. So in terms of line, I was looking at 3 square units.
So that's 3 shapes within each other.
Which, yes.
And those are more shapes. Do you see any lines in here? Now, line is usually, it can be a shape. You know, the edge, the outer edge.
It's the outer edge of that, the center focal point black and white. Then the next line I saw was the more grayed container of those colors and shapes. So that gave me another square to look at. And then as it broke out, it was much more jagged. And there are lines within the quilting and the white substrate. But it was such contrast in the more contained second frame and the breakout border around it. So it's definitely lines separating those 3 sections, but it makes a unified piece.
Right. So in this case, the line is created by the edge of each
one
section. We also have lines in the long triangles that break in toward the center. In the top, the upper left, we have that lime green point that comes down. We've got a dominant orange point that is echoed in other points that comes in from the side left. And then you've got an outlined point in the lower portion that breaks all the way into the centerpiece as well. So all of the lines in these pieces, they move your eye around and around, but they also direct the eye. Anytime you have a triangular shape that's long and thin, it becomes an arrow and your eye follows it to the point. All right, let's talk about, we've talked about focal point, we've talked about balance, we've talked about movement. Are there any other principles like unity and rhythm and motion and proportion and scale and all of those things? Does anybody else have comments about the principles of art with regard to this piece? No? Okay, I would like to ask the viewers, is there anything that this piece reminds you of or makes you think of, or any interpretation of it that is personal to you that you would like to tell us? Go for it.
I was wondering whether, is it okay if the middle is very calm. I mean, even though it attracts your attention because of the contrast, it's calm. There's not much movement, and she increases the movement as she goes out. I mean, on the outer white section, there is a lot of, I mean, I think of ideas. It reminds me of all these different ideas. If she's breaking out of the box, all these different things that she's thinking about.
So it goes from very orderly, orthogonal grid, black and white, simple in the center, and chaos grows and grows.
Right.
It becomes scattered as you go through. Anybody else have associations that they want to talk about with this piece?
I think it really does speak to kind of the breaking out of maybe these ideas, but it's also has a sense of we're breaking out of kind of a traditional quilting pattern. You know, so it's a comment within a conceptual idea, but it's also a comment on the medium of quilt making.
Interesting.
For me.
Yeah, for you. And that's always the thing that I ask the viewers to add in, because whatever layers of meaning you put on it are between you and the work, and could have something entirely different than what the artist had in mind. And as an artist, you also might have things in mind. Unless you spell it out in the artist statement, you need to let it go and let your viewers have their own associations and meanings and conversations with the work. Let the work stand on its own. You know, so I love that everybody can come to art with their own relationship to the visual message that they're getting. Karen, as we wrap up, what would you like to tell us or ask us about this piece?
Well, I enjoyed getting everyone's reactions, because the reactions and your thoughts are good and different from why I created this. I look at the black and white as very tight and rigid, and the rest of it, I was trying to break it up and get to a better world than the world of black and white and itty bitty equal pieces. So I appreciate your comments.
It's always fascinating and interesting to see your own work through other people's filter, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and I do appreciate that.
Okay, great. If you would stop your screen share.
Yep, there we go.
Fabulous. Okay, our time is up. Again, I invite you all to go to Facebook, and if you're not on the Artist's Eyes group, Critique with Lyric on Facebook. I'll try really hard to remember to look at it at the end of the day, but go request to be in that group, because in that group you can post your work and ask for group critique, ask the questions. I really request that you all follow kind of the format that we talk about here, instead of, I love this, you should do this, you know, just say what you see in the language of the elements and principles, and let the artist come to their own conclusions from there. My goal is always to help the artist see what they have created more clearly, so they can more thoughtfully and intentionally make their own decisions. I'm not a fan of, you should do this with your work, because then it's not the artist's work anymore, right? So if we stay within this framework of language, if we use the language of the visual language of the elements and principles, it keeps it, it doesn't have to be purely objective. You can have opinions about things, but it keeps it a safe environment. It's not emotionally loaded, and it's not judgmental. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment and let's have a conversation. I would also love it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, or check out lyrickinard.com, where you can find wonderful art and textile related things. Bye for now.